So, very, very good morning, everybody, and those of you who are here online just now, and welcome to this fifth and final teaching in this series on forbearance, the paramita of forbearance. For those of you joining us in YouTube, then good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. So let's start, like we always do, with that very, very special moment of good motivation and trying to summon up as much love, loving care as we can for everybody in our hearts, thinking we're here for them, on their behalf. And it's very important that we listen well, study well, with undivided attention and pure mind and a very, very happy mind, because we are studying Dharma together. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on, until we reach the very heart of enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and all six transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for, have good friends, find respect, live in places of peace and plenty. Most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good things to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being that's totally beyond suffering. And may they attain great equanimity, free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamavati shamita shatra om kurimara jite karota ke orete jovati oloyane pishuda nyamale malapan haye kukure kaka grase grasana om mukhe paramukhe amukhe shamadavane Sava graha bandhanane grihitva sava bhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savitva buddha mudra anurgatita sava mare budzarita parishuddhe vigashantu sava marakama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we become one. Well, last week we looked at the second and maybe a tiny bit of the third aspect of forbearance. The second aspect runs into the third aspect. The second aspect in the text focuses on forbearing. So remember, forbearing means being able to cope, being able to bear the load, being able to carry something and carry it through to its end. So forbearing the physical hardships of practicing Dharma. It just says forbearing the hardships of practicing Dharma. But in the text, because the texts were mainly addressed to the monastic community, it focuses on the difficulties of the monastic life and the fact that one's not just willing, but one is joyfully willing, although that comes in the next paramita, diligence, but anyway, joyfully willing to put up with, doesn't sound very good, but put up with the monastic life, but put up with the difficulties of begging for your food, of living simply, of living the itinerant life, or for yogis, living the yogic life, which is even harder in solitude, in retreat, and so on. So the text focuses on that. Last week I developed that in a way that's relevant more for a lay audience today. We kind of strayed into the third area of forbearance when we're looking at the difficulties lay people face practicing the sort of Tibetan Buddhist Dharma that we are able to receive today. And many of those were more to do with the mind than the material aspect. But certainly there is a material aspect, because most lay people, you've got to work, or you have a family, you have commitments. So there's a question of finding time, making time, in worldly terms, we'd say giving up time, but that really puts his finger on it. It's what's your pleasure? What's your pleasure? Are we giving up sunbathing to meditate? Is it, do we lose something for a lesser option or for a better option? It should be for a better option, but then life and our conditioning doesn't always make it seem like that in order to make time. But then we maybe have to let our family down, friends down, or our ego down. We have to let our ego down sometimes because it wants to play around. Ego wants to play around endlessly. So there is hardship, in material hardship in that sense, in practicing Dharma. And then, for instance, quite a few of my friends, they attend Taisitupa's Mahamudra teachings. So you have to find a fare to India, you have to arrange the time with your work, with your life, and then you need to pay. Just now it's taking place in a rather smart hotel in Delhi, so you need enough money to pay for a whole week in the Leela Hotel, and so on. Or if people want to go away for a week, a weekend of retreat, then of course you've got fares, you've got course fees, or whatever it is. There's that very practical side of things. I wanted to tell you about a friend of mine. Tell you his name. Some of you will guess who he is anyway. But he's retired now, but in his working life, then he had several quite important jobs. He's in a city, he's a city councillor, a senior city councillor with lots of responsibility for various things, people's papers and official documents, dustbin collection, all the kind of things that if you're a city councillor, you get involved with, special responsibility. But also he's director of the organization making the liaison between his city and the European community. He's at the top of that, he was. And so he, like everybody, he gets holidays every year. Every summer, he would leave everything and go off for 1 month in a cave in Spain. He'd take up to the cave with a bit of help, enough water, enough food for a whole month to live very, very simply. And then he would do his Yidam retreat, like full on. That was his holiday. And he really enjoyed it. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that because this is kind of a wonderful example. Not to mention the fact that with all those jobs, he'd be up early in the morning and doing the Tara Puja, leading the Tara Puja in the center, and then on special days doing the other prayers, special prayers and ceremonies in the evening. So anyway, there is that side to it. But what we're moving on today is the third aspect, which is mainly to do with forbearing the truth. Forbearing the truth. Like in English, we say, can you bear it? People ask me, can you bear the heat just now in the summer? Can you bear the truth? And we're mixed beings. As we're on this bodhisattva journey, then we've got our history, which we sum up by that not nice word, ego. You know, it's a collective noun. It's all sorts of strands of our history that come together under that one word, ego, because we identify the I notion with all of them. I am, I want, I do, all these verbs that we have. I love, I go, and so on. We've got that, and then we've got this more awakened part of us, bodhisattva, and here we're looking at the paramita, which are the way of the bodhisattva, the actual practice, which of course wants enlightenment for the sake of all beings. But then what is enlightenment? We sum it up by the word truth, really. In basic Buddhism, the four truths of the noble ones. In Mahayana Buddhism, two truths, relative and absolute, relative ultimate. So, truth. You'd think we'd welcome truth. I mean, in a way, it's what humanity looks for. It's what science looks for, theoretically, unless it's paid for by big business, and then it's looking for lies. But anyway, that's something else. But when you have pure science, then of course it's seeking truth. Our greatest thinkers and spiritual beings are seeking, sometimes proclaiming what they think is truth. So you'd think we'd welcome it, but actually the truth is bad news for the naughty parts of us and for ego, which doesn't welcome it and actually doesn't want to know about it. It's got this kind of automatic deafness, automatic blindness, and all the other senses. It's the way it is. Now, we're looking at forbearance, paramita, part of the 6 paramitas, which are bodhisattva practice, part of bodhisattva aspiration and practice, because we took the bodhisattva vow and we're on this bodhisattva journey. So that starts with those very beautiful words. Just as all the Buddhas of the past first set their hearts on enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then practiced the path stage by stage, so too now I set my own heart on enlightenment to benefit all sentient beings. And I too will follow the path stage by stage and train. So we're on a gradual journey. And we're on a gradual journey. And in a way, the path is a good way of explaining this level of forbearance. Although, and I think I mentioned this last time, as we go along, then the forbearance of full-on sunyata is really what it's about. But we're on a graduated path. So let's look at the reality of forbearance. And so we become Buddhist. We start taking Buddhist teachings. We don't just listen and get the information. We think about it. We try and apply it to ourselves in order to change ourselves. So there, some of the simplest things lend themselves to forbearance. Now, one of them I mentioned last week. It's very important, and it gives us kind of the clue for all the rest, which is about, do you remember, about karma, reincarnation, and many lives. So this life is just one life in a series, in a journey. And just like today, there was yesterday, now there's today, and I really hope for everybody there'll be a tomorrow. One text says there's either tomorrow or the next life. So I hope for all of you there's tomorrow, and there'll be the day after. We know this, we live according to it. There's Ken's talk, but then in 2 hours it's over, and there's the rest of today. We have already probably planned for that, what you're going to eat for lunch, where you're going to do, what you're going to do this afternoon, and so on. But when it comes to reincarnation, the whole way we think, the way we tick, the way we act, usually is through the conditioning of the whole world in which we live, which is one life, and it's finished. So that's not the Buddhist view. So even learning the simplest ideas of Buddhism is challenging because egotism, self-centeredness very much wants to live for the moment, doesn't want to factor in the rest, the long term. So last time I talked about it in terms of it being a long-term view, a wise view to do with the long term. So we have these basic teachings. This life is impermanent. And then even within this life, people are impermanent. There's some beautiful examples in Dhamma, very vivid literary examples. One is like you're looking through a window and a bird flies by. Nothing there, then there's a bird, and it's gone. And all our meetings in this life are like that. People come into our life and then go out of it, unless we go out of it ourselves first. People come, people go, health comes, health goes. So ego doesn't like that. Ego wants things to last, and the good things to last, and the nice people not to change. It's okay if the nasty people change, that's a good idea. But you don't want the nice things, the nice contacts, the nice places. But of course, that's not the way it is. So the very basic teachings, impermanence, and then karma. Karma is, I mean, you know all of this, I'm just refreshing your mind, but the deal you got, like a hand of cards this time, where you got born, whether you were born male, female, or any of the combinations we have these days, or changing stories, which country you were born in, parents you got, the family you got, and then as life went by, all the rest, all of that was created by somebody you can't remember. You know, imagine you get your bank statement through and you find you've been charged for this and charged for that, and I never did that. And then a holiday in Thailand, I've not left the country for 3 years, and then a bedroom suite, somebody's bought a bedroom suite. Of course, you'd be outraged. And then the police come and arrest you for a crime you didn't commit. You'd be more than outraged. But here we are, living a story created by somebody you probably can't even remember, which was your stream of consciousness in last life or the life before that. Depends. A bit from all the different lives coming up according to the way karma manifests. It's outrageous. It's really, you think of it, all this deal you got, you know, your story, what happened to you, all those people and what they did to you, with you. And then inside yourself, in your mind, some of the stuff that goes on. Ancient tendencies we have. And we're doing that now. This is the main point. You are writing the story of your next life every day. When it happens, you'll wonder where it came from, and you won't remember this one. Gone. But you'll pick up the bill, and you'll pick up and the good things too, of course, which is why we practice Dharma and we try and be kind and helpful and all the good things. But the truth, seeing that head on, face on, just as it is, accepting who we are in this life, what happened to us, working with it, understanding that every thought, word, deed is just like a pen writing the story of your next life. It takes forbearing and then suffering. Now, ego doesn't like that, doesn't like to hear about suffering. That's where the noise-cancelling headphones come on, and some groovy music comes in instead. So, but there's suffering now. Those Buddhists, they exaggerate. Miserable bunch, really. Buddhists all the time going on about, oh, doesn't last, impermanent. And the other day, I damaged my car in a parking, coming out of a parking. underground parking, dazzled by the sun. I took it to the garage, man. I was waiting for it because he's a garage man from a movie. The first thing he did when he looked at it, and it's a habit, he just draws in a deep breath through the teeth like this. Oh, that's going to cost you. Oh, that's a bad one. They do it to kind of prepare you for the worst, and so that they can give you a big figure. So these Buddhists, they're all the time looking, suffering and miserable, negative bunch of people, aren't they? Kind of. And so ego doesn't want to hear about suffering of birth, meaning rebirth, meaning get reborn, start all over again, be a baby again, be a kid again, be a teenager again, have to learn to drive again, all those things. Again, rebirth, and then aging, sickness, death. Doesn't want to know. So the forbearance is forbearance of the truth, where we're just honest. We're not brainwashed, moaning Buddhists. Just the truth. That's what we're here for, to find the truth. We spend special time meditating on impermanence and suffering and karma because we don't want to hear it. It's balance. We really get in there. We look a lot and a lot at the suffering, the impermanence, the change, and it brings into balance this resistance where we don't want to know, we don't want it to be like that. We don't want it to be like that. So forbearance already exists on that level. Now, I'm hesitating from time to time because I sent you a diagram. I'm wondering when to put it on screen and use it, because it's the technical side of what I'm saying is very real, right? It's what goes on. Once we look at a diagram and we get the structure of the path, we're off there again in Buddhist theory, a sequence of ideas. But I think maybe now we do need, just give me a moment. So, okay, can you see the diagram? Good. Okay. So this is one of my favorite diagrams. Down at the bottom left, you've got our meditator, our practitioner, our Dharma person. And up at the top right of the diagram, main diagram, you've got Buddha. So it's the journey from beginning to end. It goes through 5 stages. We've studied this in another course. The first 2 phases, starting from the bottom up, accumulation and integration, they're what we do while we're still under the power of rebirth, while we're still being born, like it or not, through the power of karma. Phases 3 and 4 are when we've broken free of that forever, and our mind, our default mind state is Buddha nature. Phase 5 is the end, when we're Buddha. There's no more path, there's no more training, nothing left to change. Everything is the natural perfection. So now when we come down to the beginning, the bottom, the phase of accumulation, then the lower part, as you can see, it's in lower, middle, and greater. The lower part is where most of us are now, where what I was talking about earlier is covered by the 4 mindfulnesses. Excuse me. So mindful of body, mindful of feelings, mindful of mind, mindful of Dharma. And so that mindfulness means our mind is full of the Buddha's teaching. The ones I just mentioned: impermanence, karma, cause and effect, suffering, and then no self, of course. So through those, we go to the middle phase of accumulation, where we have what are called the 4 eliminations. And this is the great work that we're engaged in also. So whatever is the 4 are whatever is good in us, then we are increasing, making it even better, even stronger. The good things that aren't yet in us, we are learning, like meditation, for instance. Most people don't meditate till they come to Dharma, and they learn to meditate. So good qualities we don't yet have, we are integrating. Negative qualities in us, through habit, we're getting rid of. And then 4th, negative qualities we don't yet have, we're making sure we never take on board, so we don't give them house space. This is a huge turnaround task. It's dealing with everything we are, all the karma we carry in our mind, in the world, and it's turning it all into a Buddhist path. The greater stage of accumulation is the development of shamatha and vipassana, so that we get stable shamatha. Our mind can be readily, instantly taken to a place of peace. It knows what samadhi, absorption, is. Then because of that, we have the basis for what are called miraculous abilities, which are the various sorts of profound insight, divine and other, in vision, hearing, knowledge of elements and miracles and so on. So already, to give some kind of perspective, what they say is that if you reach the greater stage of accumulation, 4 feet of miracles, if you got that far in this life, you're not out of samsara, you're still reborn through the power of karma, but you're worthy of being found as a reincarnation. So let's say there's a lama who's reached through their practice the greater stage of the phase of accumulation, then that's somebody who'll be such a wonderful person, a light for the world, because they've done this work of complete turnaround of everything they are, and their meditation has reached great stability. Then that kind of person is worth looking for when they die, to come back and help the people they've been helping before. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. The phase of accumulation is enormous. Now the second phase, integration, is integrating the deeper truth of sunyata into our knowledge, into everything we are and we do, so that we live according to the truth of sunyata. There are 4 stages there. Warming means that you're starting to get it. You're hearing the teachings, you're doing the practice, you have some meditation experience. They say it's like if there's a big fire, like a bonfire, then we approach it from a distance. You'll come to a point where you start to feel the actual warmth of the fire. It's not just something you see in the distance, it's not just ideas, you're starting to get it, to warm to it. And then, because of that, you'll see how the Buddha's teachings on sunyata, emptiness, voidness, apply to everything. You'll be using sunyata in your practice to purify everything you are, and that becomes like an incredible booster or catalyst, so that your inner work on the karma you carry and so on, and then your understanding of the Buddha's teaching, everything will be accelerated, and then you reach what's called summit. I'll come back to that if I remember in a few minutes. I just want to end with this diagram on the screen. But now you'll see the third level is called forbearance. And this is really the heart of what this third aspect of forbearance is about. And then through the forbearance, we reach the highest worldly level, which is exactly what it says. That's as high as you can get while you're still an individual, it's called, an individual, being reborn through the power of karma. After that, we break through to Buddha nature. That's our default state. Our mind is vast, our mind is multiple. At that first bodhisattva level, we can be in 100 different meditations at the same time. Our mind is no longer locked into one place. We can be in 100 different places at the same time. Everything changes because we left this imprisonment into a being an individual. So I'm coming back to summit. So I hope here I am back again. The diagrams become Ken. So the summit, it's a typical children's mountain, like from a drawing, just a triangle. Lovely memories I have of traveling east in 1970 and passing by Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat, seen from certain views, is a very classical mountain, snow-capped. And but anyway, that kind of a mountain. So now at the base of the mountain, it's big, and you've got the forest, the jungles, the valleys, whatever. And then as it goes up, it gets less and less and less and less and less and less, until it's the point and you're up there surrounded by space. And it's usually quite simple and rocky at the top. So the big bit in the jungle at the bottom is ego when we start, and all of its confusion and all the baggage we carry through our past karma. And we're working on it, and we're working on it. And as the rock of the mountain gets smaller, then depending where you are, the space gets bigger. And so we're learning about sunyata. We're past the warming stage. We're really applying it more and more all the time in our practice, in our daily life. And so because of that, the illusions are dropping away. And at the end, at summit, then there's very little left, and the spaciousness is kind of panoramically everywhere around us. That's why we use the word summit. But after that comes the forbearance. It's like, it's not probably possible for humans. Just an idea, you need imagination. But it's like you get to the summit, so you're on the very top of the mountain. You're surrounded in space. And as one mountaineer friend told me, he said, then what do? You got to the top. where do you go after the top? So now, usually what you've got to do then is go back down, right? The mountain. It's as though you could now step into space and carry on up into space. You can fly, let's say. And bye-bye down there, all gone. So the letting go, this is what we're looking at with that level of forbearance. So now we need to be a bit technical still. When we look at the scriptures related to this third aspect of forbearance, then it talks about the two aspects of sunyata. And so one aspect of sunyata means voidness, emptiness, absence in some ways. So we look at the one is the absence of a persona, of a fixed self in sentient beings. And the other is the absence of fixed entity in phenomena around us. The second one is hard. When we look at the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, first turning, second turning, third turning, when we look at the Shravaka teachings, Hinayana, whatever you want to call them, teachings based on the first turning, then that's all about the absence of ego, absence of persona. As I mentioned earlier, ego doesn't want to hear these teachings, and this transcending your habits of ego, of self-centeredness, is a whole challenge in itself, and we need forbearance related to that. But in the whole scheme of things, the journey to enlightenment, that's the easy bit, according to the texts. So where would you be? Where would you be, sort of? Well, you do a lot of work on your ego delusions and mindfulness and so on, and you read inspiring Buddhist teachings. So you become a floating consciousness in the universe without very much personal agenda. You're there for everybody. You're kind of a cloud of love in this world. And there it is, people, the samsara, existence, 6 realms, all that's there. Well, if you get that far, that's fantastic, wonderful. But then, to understand that just like before, where it seemed outrageous at first when Buddhist teachers told you you don't have a self, a fixed self, but then you came to understand that through the 5 aggregates and all the other teachings, you saw yourself in a different way, as a changing, multiple set of stories, stream of consciousness. Just in the same way, now they're going to tell you none of what you're experiencing out there has its own reality. Just like your ego was a delusion, all that's a delusion. So in the texts, for instance, Patrul Rinpoche's teachings and others, it says at the time of Buddha, he had disciples who abandoned their ego delusions and had very stable, peaceful minds. When he told them about the sunyata of what we call dharma, dharma means all phenomena, things, It says some would faint, some would vomit blood, some just couldn't take it. No! Really, it's what it says in the text, not figuratively. It says it was such a shock for some, and they refused to hear. They couldn't take it. That would be kind of like an exit point. Gosh, Buddha got us this far, fantastic, but now what? No, can't take it. Bye-bye. I'm cancelling my subscription. Really, that kind of thing. Because so that's the technical explanation. Is what we're looking at in the 4 levels of the phase of integration. Yoga to the absolute. Then we warm to the ideas of sunyata. We work on them extensively with everything we are. We get to the summit. But then, okay, you've got rid of all those delusions. What's the truth of the matter? That's what it's about, isn't it? Getting rid of delusions. You want to know, once all those projections and screens and spectacles have been taken off, layers and layers and layers of delusion, what's the truth of existence? In fact, it's beautiful. It's the truth of Buddha nature. We read the Buddha nature teachings, 3 kayas, qualities of the Buddha. It's wonderful. But that's words. That's ideas. Here we're talking about, you remember where we came from on the path? We've done all that work on ourselves, the 4 great changes. We've got feet of miracles. You have very stable, meditative mind, and so on. Now we've gone even further, where the last of the ego clinging, the very root of the ego clinging delusion goes, and the truth of the matter comes in. I'm tempted to use one of Chujam Trungpa's images. I never really liked it. Some of his writing's terrific, some of his stuff's weird, to my mind. But it's a long story. But he gives a very vivid image. I think it's overdramatic and it's not really like it is, but it's a good image. So let's use that as an example. He said the bad news is you're falling from the aeroplane and you realize you don't have a parachute. So what he means is there's no reference points. No reference points at all anymore. You're in free fall. Every moment's new without reference points. So the bad news, you're falling from the aeroplane and you realize you don't have a parachute. The good news, there's no ground. So, he was very clever at those kind of, images. I mean, obviously that doesn't come from the Buddha's teachings. They didn't have parachutes and airplanes at the time of the Buddha. So it's just to give you a clue of what we're talking. I can't give you more than a trivial clue like that, because the teachings on sunyata are extensive, they are profound, we need to work with them, as we have done in some of our courses. Like one of the very first courses was sunyata for dummies, and that kind of thing, where we go through some of the basic outline of what we do need to learn, meditate on in terms of sunyata. To say a few things, so let's go back now to 2 levels of sunyata. No person, no things. no person, no things. Sunyata of self, sunyata of entities, it's called in the text. So the first one means there is no fixed self. However, abbreviated in the text, because at the time of Buddha, everyone knew what was going on, so things got abbreviated to anatma, no self. But no self doesn't mean no self. And the words, the self does not exist, don't mean the self does not exist. You're in trouble. You are the victim of translators, because translators translated the Tibetan, translated the Sanskrit. They didn't make a translation that translated the meaning. They translated the words, which is probably what they ought to have done. It needs a teacher to unpack the meaning. And what was it all about? We have to go back, and when we do the sunyata teachings, that's part of it. Today is very brief. But we go back to the time of Buddha, we go back to the spiritual traditions that existed at the time of Buddha, and then we go through time up to Nagarjuna and the Sangha, particularly up to Nagarjuna, when other Indian traditions of mysticism and spirituality emerged. Like if we look at things like Bhagavad Gita, that's a few hundred years after the Buddha, huge influence on thinking in India. If we look at the 1st century BC, is a turning point. Before that, most of Indian Buddhism was head stuff and meditation. There wasn't very much God worship, shrines, temples, offerings, all that stuff really came in big around that time, 1st century BC, and then afterwards. Different beliefs, different gods, and so on. So this Buddhism was evolving its language and its thinking to express itself in contrast with these other ideas and trends which were emerging and gaining a lot of ground. So not everything that we find, how can we say, mentioned by Nagarjuna and the various views that he mentions and that he criticizes and that he shows the fallacy in, were there at the time of Buddha. Like one set of people, they were called the naked ascetics. Maybe you see sometimes on TV, once every 10 years, they go up the Ganges. I think it's called I forget the name. Anyway, it's a big thing.
Kumbh Mela.
Kumbh Mela, thank you very much, Neil. And but you see the pictures and you see these naked ascetics who just go up there naked up into the mountains. So that was one particular view that really developed afterwards. So the Buddhist teachings on sunyata are based on what the Buddha said, but their formulation needed to become much more evolved, diverse, as the centuries went by. But in all of that, to come back to the point, when it says anatma, no self, it means there wasn't the self that those other faiths were talking about. They're saying self. You can have a divine self. Although Ken on the ground in life changes, there's one bit of me which is a changeless Ken soul. Same idea in Christianity, which wasn't around at the time of Buddha, of course. And so this idea of a fixed personal self, a soul, the word for that is anatma. So Buddha taught to the faiths that existed at his time, no self in that sense, which is a fixed, it's eternal, a forever self. He says, no, there isn't one. Nobody ever found it. If you look in any way, in the ordinary way with meditation powers, you'll never find it, and so on. So he was saying there isn't this fixed self. But then he taught what we really are as a stream of consciousness with the 5 aggregates. So he didn't say, you are not, full stop. He couldn't say that, because who would he say it to? He would be denying his own wisdom. If you're talking to people who don't exist, what are you? You're crazy. So of course he wasn't. Of course he wasn't. He would be contradicting himself with every time he said it. And what he is saying is, you do not have a fixed soul. There's no cosmic Ken forever. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. But there is this ongoing story from past lives, and it's like a garden. You know, I can say my garden, it sounds like one thing, but what really is my garden? It's trees, one tree. I've got an olive tree, it must have been planted between 150, 200 years ago. Long story, beautiful big tree. Pine trees, they're about 100, 150 years old. And then some bushes I planted myself. Some flowers that only last for a year, then they're gone. Others come back. Not to mention the soil, which has become more acid even since I knew it here. Some things can't grow in it anymore. And then the plants, the insects, the birds and everything that makes that garden has its own story, its own dynamic. And over time, the garden of my mother-in-law's time has become the neglected garden of my time. The things that thrived can't thrive anymore since the ants came and started eating the trees. So now we've got stuff that plants itself. Amazing things. They've got, what's it called in English? A mulberry tree planted itself. That was a lovely surprise this year. Didn't know what it was. It was a tree that had planted itself, and this year, first mulberries came. Oh, it's a mulberry tree. Anyway, Ken's garden is one term, but really it is thousands of parallel realities, each with their own lifespan, each with their own causal chain. And that's what we are. All the stories that have been made by our karma in the past that have ripened now, when we analyze that as the 5 aggregates. So Buddha's teaching on no self is not one of total non-existence. It's that there is no, we have to add this word, fixed self. And when it says, we're still talking about the persona, Ken doesn't exist, it only means Ken does not exist in a fixed, independent way. In a fixed, in other words, changeless, and independent, doesn't depend on anything to be what he is, way. Of course, that makes a big sentence. So in the old Buddhist texts, everyone knew it meant that. They just say, it doesn't exist. Ken doesn't exist. In a fixed, independent way, Ken doesn't exist. That Ken doesn't exist. What does exist is an impermanent, interdependent Ken. Of course, I depend on my porridge in the morning. keep me alive, and all the rest of the food. I depend on your consciousness to be Khen, the teacher, and so on and so on. Buddha never said we don't exist in the English meaning of doesn't exist if you just read it on a page. We have to add those words every time in our head, otherwise we get it wrong and we become nihilists, which we're not. So that's relatively easy to understand and apply to sunyata of sentient beings, of self, of oneself. But now the same applies to everything. So now our forbearance, how does the forbearance come into that? Well, through the bodhisattva teachings and the scriptures we study, we get help as we are warming to the teachings of sunyata and getting to know them, coming close to the meaning. So we start to feel it, we get help. Buddha tells us it's like a dream. It's like a mirage. It's like a rainbow. It's like hypnosis. And of course, Mahayana Buddhists, they go around saying those things. Oh, it's just like a dream. It's an illusion. And so on. They do that kind of thing. It's great if they understand what it means. Buddha was not being poetic. Oh, it's just like a dream. It's an illusion. Like magic show. Poetry, where you draw your own conclusions. These examples are very powerful, meaningful examples of where for us something is there until we think about it and realize it's not there. So a mirage. I don't know if animals are deceived by mirages. In some of the explanations in the scriptures, there is the assumption that they are. So it says an animal might see in the desert a mirage and think it's water, and of course run towards it to get a drink because they're thirsty. Then they discover there's nothing there. There's never been anything there. So with these days, with our science, of course, we know the optics, we know about sunlight and refractive surfaces and the eye, and then our own association with shimmering kind of blue stuff there, water. It looks like water, and so we think it is water unless we know better. So, but now here's the point. When you know the science and you're in the desert and you see the mirage, you still see it, don't you? It's not as though the science stops you seeing it. You still see it. But how do you see it? Through eyes of wisdom. And what will it make you do? It will make you not turn your Jeep off where you're going to drive over that way to fill up a jerry can of water, because you know there isn't. It will make you act wisely. So, and then why was there the mirage? This is the important point. Through interdependence. No sun, no mirage. No flat, hot surface, no refraction. No eye, you don't see anything anyway. no brain with a memory of water, no mirage, which tells you I'm seeing water. All those things need to come together. Take away any one of them, no mirage. The power of interdependence makes the delusion of the mirage. Like this, so Buddha says, like a mirage. It's very important. He doesn't say it is a mirage. He says our perception of the phenomenal world, other people, other things, universe, whatever it is like a mirage. It is produced by the power of interdependence, so many factors coming together. When we have the science, in this case, the science of the Buddha's teaching through mindfulness, mindful reflection, then we still experience the same things. It's not as though all of a sudden, anyway, if all of a sudden, how many people are we? 41. I pick one of you and I realize you're like a mirage, then it's not as though suddenly I've only got 40 people left and you've disappeared. You're still there, but now I'm wiser about it. And if we take each of those examples like a dream, why do we dream what we dream? It's very complicated actually why we dream what we dream. There's a lot to do with what's in our subconscious. It's also to do with where your energies are in your body. So if you're down in the lower part of your body and in your bladder or something like that, then you get dreams of water and watery things. And if your energy is higher up, you dream of flying. And lots of different things come together to make the dream. There is a process of interdependence. Now with the dream, we have a different example, similar to interdependence. There is a delusion or an illusion. But the point with the dream is that while you're in it, it's totally real. And not only, sometimes it's even more real than real. I think I've had more beautiful experiences in dreams than ever in life, mostly. Or more scary things happen in nightmares. The other night I was fighting with a robot. Where on earth did that come from? Where did it come from? It was quite neat, actually. I started spinning it, and then somehow it crashed into a mirror and became 1,000 shattered robots and then disappeared into nothing. That was quite good. But, what on earth? What on earth? Where did that come from? But while you're there, you've got an aggressive robot. You've got to do something about it. It was very real. If you're in a beautiful old castle in a dream, you really believe somebody must have built this. The moss must have grown on the walls. Smells of history. You feel the dampness, whatever it is so real. The point with the dream, until you wake up. And when you wake up and look back, then it's quite funny or quite extraordinary. And you realize, gosh, not one atom of that castle existed, or the robot, not one atom. So it's another meaningful example. And then we have the example of hypnosis, and the famous one. I know most of you know this because it's been in other courses, but in case you don't, and for the sake of this course, one of the most famous things that's quoted when the Buddha talks about sunyata of things, he says, it's like a magic show. It's like a magic show. So what was a magic show at the time of Buddha? It wasn't somebody in a top hat sawing a lady in two in a case, or taking off the hat and pulling out rabbits and things like that. Magic show at the time of the Buddha was actually professional hypnotizers, hypnotists, that's the word. So they come along and you'd pay your money and they would hypnotize you and take you to wonderful stories. People at the time, if they, later on, not so much at Buddha's time, but later on, they believed in the gods. So the hypnotizer would make a whole world. He'd be telling a story, and for the person who's hypnotized, they're up there, there's Indra in his chariot, and they're in the god realms. They pay good money, they got a good show, and then when the show's over, they're brought back down to earth, and they're very, very happy because they didn't have TV, they didn't have any other way of going to a god's realm. It was a unique experience. Wonderful. We had in our Johannesburg center for a couple of years, we had the lady who did the office. That was her day job. Her night job was professional hypnotist. She was very, very good. She said, actually, I can put almost anyone under just like that in a second, mind power. And it's quite scary. I only got hypnotized like that against my will once. And I ended up, it was in Delhi. I met a man, he got into a conversation, he started telling me my mother's name and things about, I thought, gosh, this is amazing, this guy knows stuff. And then, for another 10 rupees, I tell you a bit more, for another 100 rupees, a bit more. And so by the time it was finished, he was gone, and it was a bit lighter in terms of finance. And but he just took over the mind like that. Very powerful. So anyway, with hypnosis, the point is this: the people who didn't pay the money for the show and who are looking at what's going on from the outside, they see the audience, the hypnotist, and the hypnotist has stones and he's telling the story. And he moves the stone, but he's saying, now the chariot is going here, and then he moves other. They see a man moving stones, telling a story, and people go, oh, and whatever story he's telling, they're like a cinema audience. They're reacting. People from the outside who are not hypnotized can see how people are. They can be taken to fear, to ecstasy, by anything, by the power of mind of somebody else dominating their mind. And we see how influenceable we are. Fluence means flows in. How influenceable we are by so many things, including our own past. So each of the Buddha's examples, there are 8 main ones altogether in the scriptures, is quite technical in a way. Always they show us how interdependence has programmed our perception. And so then when we get to summit and forbearance stage, we see how programmed our second by second movie of existence is. It's a story. Now, this is where we come to reference points, storytelling. Over this life, since we started without a story, relatively, little ones, they don't have a story. They just have milk. They just have milk and a stomach and sleep. Gradually it comes, Dada, Mama, food, whatever. We can see in this life how our whole story of me the way we tell ourselves in our heads the story of me. Poor me, wonderful me, clever me, or whatever. However we tell that complicated story has developed over this life. And then how we tell the story of the world we live in, came through our parents, came through our schooling, came through our experience, the influences that flowed in from various things. And we have a narrative of me, a narrative of other, and most importantly, the interaction of these three things. So what we learn in the sunyata teachings is that these three components, the self story, the other story, and the interaction story, is what each of us is about, is what we're living. It's the whole way we see it. And gradually, as we understand sunyata, then the other people will still be there. The world will still be there with Ukraine and Russia and all the rest of it. But like the mirage, like the rainbow, like the dream when we wake up, all those things, we will see through the deluded way we interpreted it before, the way we projected onto other people, the way we projected onto life, the way we projected onto ourselves, and we're stuck in a story. So we are unsticking all the stories. I made not really a haiku, because that's an actually quite precise form, something I almost put on Facebook the other day, and then I thought, no. 6 words. Self-preservation. Ego jam. Preservatives, they're preserves. Jams are called preserves. Self-preservation. Ego jam. Sticky. That was it. Sort of short poem. I was thinking of the image I put, some jam cooking or sticky jam in a copper pot, but I never did. So anyway, the story of me, of interaction, these are sometimes called reference points, and all the references go. They need to go, so that the truth can come through. Now, this falling away of our illusions needs to be handled sweetly, with a lot of loving care for ourselves. And so for that, we have the relative journey of the bodhisattva. It's so good. It's so well designed. It's so intelligent. Ideally, we know from the very start that it's another illusion, but it's a better illusion. So we go from being me, Ken, the Englishman, to, with all the history and the story I told of myself, to Ken, the bodhisattva. And that's nice. It's a nice thing to be. You're becoming a kinder person, a gentler person who has meditation skills, a person who knows more and more these wonderful deep secrets of life that are the treasures of the various religions and so on. But when the more we become the bodhisattva, then the bodhisattva doesn't have a persona that it needs, like Ken needs to be Ken. We have a universal persona, that of the bodhisattva. And you may remember in past courses, I've made an analogy of this from a story where somebody helped somebody who had an accident, and she thanked him, and he said, no, I did what anybody would do. And we become that famous anybody, that any good body. We're doing what any bodhisattva would do. It's not, I'm doing what Ken does, Ken helps people. It's not that kind of a thing. It's natural. What else could you do but help? It's normal. Any other bodhisattva would do the same. So gradually we are easing ourselves out of a needed persona and a fixed persona into a universal bodhisattva idea. From the start, we know we're selling ourselves an illusion, but a better illusion. But from there, it's so much easier to dissolve into the true nature of everything, which in our lineage will be pointed out by our guru when the time comes. And that will be the most extraordinary time of your life, moment of your life, when we recognize Buddha mind, and that's who we really are. So there today, I think I have to stop. But this third type of forbearance is forbearing the truth. As our path progresses through those levels, that last aspect of the truth of going beyond all narratives. So you hear, so like the mirage, like the rainbow, when you know what's going on and that it's not what it seems, it's still there. Your mind is still talking somewhere, but you don't buy into it anymore. It's noise. It's there, but your own mind is Buddha mind. It's clarity, spaciousness. So in that diagram, I won't bother to put it back on screen. You've got it. You'll see when we go through to the third of the 5 stages of the path, the first bodhisattva level, that's when we move from, in Mahamudra terms, 1 point to the beyond narrative stage. I forget the word I used there, just a second, and I tell you, uncomplicated. Our mind, complicated means our mind's going blah, 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 telling a story. Either in words or in images, we're no longer deluded by that. So when it says no thought in Buddhist texts, it doesn't mean no thought, like nothing, blank. Can do, that happens sometimes, but it means no power of thought. Thoughts can't get you anymore. We're not deluded by thought. Thought isn't what you are. That word thought means the usual play of consciousness, mind stream. Anyway, now we've come to the end of our 5 talks on forbearance. I've sketched out some of the main ideas. Of course, forbearance itself is a real quality that we develop through applying all of the Buddha's teachings and our meditation experience to our life. And remember, we started with the forbearance of aggression and anger and all the things that make us upset and hostile. And then we worked through the forbearance of the discomfort of following a Dharma path when we're still emerging from worldliness and we're still very much surrounded by worldliness and inworldliness ourselves. The discomfort, what we have to bear in order to break through and get free. And now today we've looked more at, as our spiritual journey evolves, then we have to be able to bear, to face full on the crumbling of all our illusions, all of them. They all have to go. So we see in the wonderful life stories of Milarepa and Naropa Mapa how even for them with their wonderful skills, their guru's job was to help them face and break through their own remnants of clinging and ego. So let's dedicate whatever was good and helpful today. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained. By the main enemy, mind's defilements being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by the waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it has not arisen. May its development know no setbacks, and may it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may I quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. Thank you very much. So over to you, and if you have anything you'd like to add or any questions, then.
Hi, Ken. But first of all, thank you so much for the course and particularly today's talk, which I found very inspiring. There were two moments during today's talk. At the beginning, you said, ego doesn't want to know about truth. And later on, you were explaining the reaction of some of Buddha's followers when he explained the second aspect of sunyata about absence of fixed entities out there. And what came to mind on both occasions was there's a film which probably most people have seen, A Few Good Men, starring Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. And Nicholson is a general being questioned in a court case by Tom Cruise as a Navy lawyer. And at one point, when he's under pressure, Jack Nicholson exclaims very loudly, "You can't handle the truth." So that sort of sums up why we can't handle the truth. I think both those examples that you gave. But thank you for the course.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I was thinking of a few vivid examples of what you were saying. And the truth of that does come more often than we think, because it seems almost inevitable, and especially if we're on a more accelerated path, that we get taken to a point where you are confronted with the truths that you just are very, very hard for you to take. So the skill of a good teacher, if there's an edge, is to take somebody this close to the edge where they can cope with it, have cope means forbearance, and help them face as much as they can face without breaking up, and gradually ease them back a bit of a break, bit of a rest before you shift the boundary and then take them up to here. But if you take them there, then they break, or it's so much they shut down, like the monkeys, and they run away from the Dharma. And then that's very sad. So that's a simple explanation. The reality is not that simple. Not that simple. And I'm going back to Trungpa Rinpoche again, because he said Vajrayana, he said no decent Vajrayana teacher is ever going to want to sell it to the disciples. It is very difficult, very dangerous. Any good Vajrayana teacher should be warning people off it, or at least warning people about how psychologically challenging, dangerous it can be. And I think from my own experience, very, very true words, those. So, a lot of casualties in Vajrayana. I've seen over the years. I've had a broader experience than most, because a lot of my life was traveling around Dharma centers, talking personally with people, and especially people in trouble. And then a lot of my friends have gone into long retreat. I think Samiling had almost 200 long retreaters over the years. And a lot of casualties. Casualties, temporary, casualties for life. A few people gone crazy. 1 or 2 suicides. It's not a joke. It's very serious. So this question of forbearance is deep. The paramita of forbearance is profound, and it is important. And the good news, the good takeaway is spend as much time as you can on goodness and wholesomeness, kindness and love for yourself, devotion, pure devotion as you can manage to your teachers and to the lineage. And then if all of that goodness and profound connection is there, then you'll never go wrong. But when one of those is missing, and people want to go too fast, too quickly, then it can be very dangerous. Gosh, I've shut everybody up with that one.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you.
I think facing our realities is scary, and it's admitting a vulnerability that we don't want to admit.
Mm.
That's why it's hard.
Absolutely. And it exists on all those levels I tried to sketch out today, from the very beginning, accepting impermanence and change, accepting the fact of rebirth, and accepting the karma that we have, our own karma, and the results of our own choices. So much. But the good news is we're learning. This paramita of forbearance means we are learning to cope and how to cope. There's just so much good advice in all the paramita. Forbearance is, I've found, the one that's got so much good advice in it.
I think, Ken, another thing I'd just like to say is that sometimes I think we try to run before we can. We try to run before we can walk.
Mm.
Like, you've only got to look at it on the internet these days. There's so much stuff out there. We have so much choice, yet, but we're not ready for it.
Mm. I think one thing related to that I found very true and very helpful was Khenpo Labu, Drupal Rinpoche, talking about his experience with retreaters. He said they're in long retreat. Okay, in long retreat you get all these, top of the range practices, and you do your mandro, and then you do a year of Vajravarahi, and then you do a year where you get the 6 yogas and chakra samvara and all of this. And he says, when they get 2 or 3 years in, and they realize it's not quite working, they hoped they'd been like Milarepa, and you can melt a mountain of snow with your tumo and all the rest of it, and it's not working. And then he says, then they realize that although they're doing the Vajrayana practice, doing it very well, they're giving all the time, the concentration, they're doing all the very many, large number of complicated things you do, but they realize that what is the foundation for Vajrayana, their bodhicitta, isn't that good. There's a story from one of the Karmapas about yogis in retreat. They're both doing tumo practice. And the one who's in a cave just a bit lower than the other one, his bodhicitta is not so good, and he's doing the tumo, but he's freezing. And the one above him is doing the tumo so that the warm water trickles down and warms him up a bit, the guy below, because he had good bodhicitta. So he says what inevitably comes is you realize that the more true, authentic loving kindness and compassion there is, and this real wish of bodhicitta to become Buddha, to help other people, that is what fires the practice. Practices like tumo and all the rest of it, and makes them really work. And he says, so then they work more on their bodhicitta so that their practice works. And as they're working more on their bodhicitta, then they start questioning, why is it I've not got so much bodhicitta as I'd like? I'm not filled with this lovely sort of glow of love that touches every cell in your body and for all beings. Why not? And they realize they've not really taken refuge because they don't really know what Buddha is, and they're not really longing with all their heart to become Buddha because they don't know what Buddha is, and they're still clinging to their samsara. They've not really taken refuge in Dharma as the path, and they're sort of 65% taken refuge, and you've got a 35% samsara insurance policy behind you, something like that. So, and he said, bit by bit, and then they realized, why haven't I taken refuge with all my heart for all sentient beings and longing to become Buddha? It's because I never really did the 4 ways of changing the mind properly. The message of samsara's suffering never went in 100%. The message of the power of karma, cause and effect. No, I treated it as a preliminary, something you have to do and then go on to the real stuff. So he said, and then once they get back to the 4 ways of changing the mind, then their Vajrayana practice really takes off, because the real thing's now working. It's so sincere, and then it goes very, very quickly, very, very quickly indeed. But I thought that was a very good observation, and how the mind, it's nice, it's kind of, in a good sense, it's an optimism where you really do want to be like Milarepa and do things quickly, and you feel that there's a beautiful yogi, a beautiful bodhisattva inside you. You know that, because there is. It's just the donkey work, the spade work we've got to do.
But I think, if I can just say, we have to be careful with Jesus complex. I would say bodhisattva complex.
Yes.
Even I wouldn't want to say the word, but sometimes I feel like we feel like we have a guilt if we don't do the highest, giving up everything. Like to give everything you've got, your whole being, and sometimes we are not ready for it. It wouldn't help to maybe if we just, because it destroys us. We are not.
That's it. This is the limit. whether you go to this side of the limit or beyond the limit. This is it. So a good, it's why we need teachers, because then we realize we are on a path. It's not all or nothing. It's, we go from how we are, start. You have to start where you are. You can't start anywhere else. I think there's a book called Start Where You Are. It's a phrase saying, how could you start from somewhere else? If I start by being René, that's never going to work. You know? So you start from where you are, but then you realize what you can and can't do, and you go to a little bit better and a little bit better in those 5 stages of the path. This is the whole 4 great changes, 4 great turnarounds, bit by bit, what we can manage to do. And part of that involves actually learning what you can and can't do. You have
and to forgive yourself that you are not that good bodhisattva. You know,
yeah.
It's so hard to forgive yourself.
Well,
You're not as perfect as you want to be.
It's a good new habit to develop. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well, maybe that's it for today. And so now next Saturday is our monthly Tonglen practice for those who are in the Tonglen group. And then in a fortnight's time, we've got an overview of all 6 paramita, because now we've done numbers 1, 2, 3. And I think it's a good time to just spend one session getting an overview before we go into a few sessions on the paramita of diligence, which is the next one. So see most of you in a fortnight's time, or some of you next week. Take good care. Bye.
Thank you, Ken.
Cheers, Ken.
Bye.
Right, thank you. Try now. Try, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ken.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you so much.